nervous, actually.
Why are you nervous?
Because we've been preparing for this for so long.
Uh-huh.
And now it's time.
It's like the anticipation of going on the date is scarier than the actual date itself.
That's right. Because there's been so much anticipation.
Anticipation.
I fall down to my knees. Eyes are raised to the sky.
Welcome to Season 2 of Assumptions. This is the podcast where two friends, a Christian and an atheist, try to understand the other's worldview. My name is Kyle. I'm the atheist.
And my name is Daniel, and I'm the Christian.
And so it's been a little bit
Yeah.
of time since we did our first full season together.
Yeah.
We're back in the studio here together. And we want to go through a few different items before jumping into our first episode.
Yeah.
So the first thing to talk about is that there is going to be a slight format change.
That's right.
Don't get too scared
No.
about those words. But we decided, and we've talked about this even in our wrap-up episode, of wanting additional voices to be heard
Yeah.
inside of our podcasts. So we've actually conducted a bunch of different interviews with different people from different walks of life, some on the faithful, some on the not so faithful, the degenerates is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
We've gotten a bunch of degenerates
Just
and
to keep you company.
heathens and heretics, and as well as faithful people
Yeah.
to get their voices so that they can talk on all the different topics that we want to discuss.
Yeah, that's right. And some of them are friends of the show. Some of them are experts in their field when it comes to these things. They've written books or they've or articles on these topics. But we're excited, and our plan is to have those voices appear at the beginning of each episode to kind of whet our appetite for the themes that we'll be talking about. And then the full-length interviews will come out at the end of this season as additional episodes. Yeah.
It's all about content, all
That's
about that
right.
additional content.
No, I'm excited. There's some people that we get to have on this show that are a few in particular that I'm just so excited about. I followed their work for a long time, and then a number of people, even friends that we have, that are always insightful and ask good questions on these themes. So it'll be exciting to be able to listen to all of their content when that comes out at the end.
Absolutely. This also means that we absolutely want to hear from you,
Yeah.
the listeners, as well. We put this call out all the time, but we really do mean it.
We didn't get any responses last time, guys.
Well, I wasn't going to
That's-
say that,
Okay,
but
well, I am.
you can definitely have your voice be heard. You can send us, obviously, a text email, but I think it would be great if you actually gave us your voice
Yeah.
as well. So what we're asking, as you're listening to this season's episodes, if you have something that you want to tell us, if there is a question, a comment, or an idea that was provoked in you because of one of our episodes, send us a recorded message from your phone. I would say about a minute or less, telling us who you are, where you're from, and to send that to assumptionspod@gmail.com. That'll come to us, and we can include that in our concluding episode.
When
here
should we
this year.
have our listeners send that to us? By
At any
when?
time.
By when? Is there a deadline?
Oh, I can't do that math. Just as you're listening, send that to us.
Yeah.
We have 8 episodes in our season this year, and the 9th will be our concluding episode.
That's right.
So
We need them by that time.
we'll need it by that time.
Yeah, and the reason we want to have all these extra voices on this season, particularly this podcast, is because we're going to be talking about some themes that are contentious, perhaps.
Yeah, so Daniel, why don't you let the cat out of the bag, so to
Yeah.
speak? What is our topics for this season?
Our topic is sex, relationships, marriage, family, community, all those parts that make us human. And
That's right.
the reason we want to talk
The
about
dirty
this,
stuff.
the dirty stuff. But I mean, the reason we want to tackle these themes is for a couple reasons. First of all, I mean, we're all fascinated by it. Let's just admit.
Yeah, absolutely.
But another thing is, whenever you have someone who bills himself as a bisexual atheist and a somewhat conservative Christian in a room together,
White bread Christian.
I feel like the question right away for my audience, my more conservative Christian friends, is, what are you doing hanging out with a bisexual? What does that even mean, bisexual?
Basically, he wears oven mitts a lot of the time. He can actually not touch skin.
Isn't that bipolar? No, that's jointed?
Bicuspid?
Yeah.
Bipedal?
There you go. But, no, it's just like it's for Christians. It's a contentious issue in terms of what does that look like. But then for the friends of the show who are who live in our society, I think the idea of someone who's, I guess Christians get a lot of bad rap for being quite conservative on these matters. And so it's just an elephant in the room.
Yeah.
when
No,
we're talking about this.
what draws me to these topics is, yes, of course, it's always those things that we always are curious about, but
Yeah.
in polite society we never really discuss a whole lot. But I actually think in our modern society, sexuality, gender, backgrounds, love, marriage, all of these topics are becoming more and more important, but also more and more delved into, where people are revealing more about themselves, and we're learning just so much more about people's eccentricities, I guess, for lack of a better word, that I'm trying to draw out of my brain skull.
It's out of the closet.
But I just I'm fascinated by that concept, and I'm really curious to have that conversation with you, Daniel, just because I know we're going to have some differences of opinion on this.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of assumptions when we first started this was, hey, let's do a podcast where we can have a conversation about something, but not yell at each other because of it.
Yeah,
we're
how
here to
can we-
listen more than we are to talk at each other.
Definitely. And I feel even just this idea of a Christian and atheist talking together, people expect it to be a fight and to be an argument, to be a throwdown and a winner and loser at the end of each episode. But that's not
I did
what
bring my mace. So.
or your wrestling mat.
That's right.
But what we've been doing is much more. It's a community oriented. It's saying we are both living. We're friends. We're in the same world together. We share a lot of things in common. Yeah, we're gonna have disagreements, and those disagreements matter. And so for a topic that is so contentious and has so much weight to it, it'll be interesting exploring it through that lens. And then the third reason why we're interested in doing this is because these things matter to everybody. We came from families. Surprise, surprise.
Right.
We are interested in having relationships. These are things that matter a great deal to us, and so we believe that worldview applies to those details of life as well. And so that's why we're going to be tackling it on this season. So let's talk a little bit about what the plan of the season is.
Absolutely.
What themes do we hope to cover?
So we're going to start on this episode by talking about family and why that's important and if it's important in the first place.
Yeah.
We're then going to go into episode 2 and talk about sexuality, about why do we define ourselves by our sexuality? Should we define ourselves by our sexuality?
Sure. What is the purpose of sex? What's it there for? Yeah, and then as a lot of our audience knows, you identify as bisexual.
Correct.
And that's a huge part of your life, reckoning with that and dealing with that. So I want to hear your story. I want you to tell us what that was like going through that, and how that shapes your life. And then the response. How do LGBTQ+, how has the church responded to that? How should the church respond to that? What's the Christian vision for that? That's a tough conversation. I'm nervous for that episode, but I'm also looking forward to it.
Great. I'm actually really looking forward to hearing about your coming out story of being straight. I know that was a really tough choice for you.
Hard.
Yeah. We're going to go into dating. Dating is the big rage nowadays with like apps and social media and all that sort of thing. So how does one date in the modern era, and is it actually the worst thing ever?
Yeah, and also how does one date as a Christian, and how does one date as someone who doesn't necessarily believe in celibacy before marriage? Yeah.
And that's going to segue really nicely into the next episode, which will be about marriage and commitment.
Right.
Is commitment something that people strive for nowadays? Is marriage important in a secular society? And
what was your parents' marriage like?
Correct. Yeah.
My parents' marriage. What is your vision for marriage? If you have a vision for marriage, do you want to get married, Kyle? Stay tuned.
Save it for the
out.
episode.
That's right. And then, as we've been talking about marriage and community and dating, we realize that that's actually a big portion of life, but it's not all of life. And so we're going to have an episode 7, dedicated to singleness and friendship, and how in a sexualized culture where that seems to be assumed, what is the role of singleness and what is the role of friendship? And then that moves nicely into our final episode before the wrap-up, which is on community. Community is a huge part of life, whether you're married or single or not. And so we're going to be talking about how communities shape us. For me, my church community is very important. Where does someone go to get that kind of community when one doesn't have that foundation of belief? And then our last episode will be a wrap-up. That's when we hope to hear from other voices, your own voices, and just kind of refresh ourselves on what we've learned and what we want to do next.
And talking about other voices, I think this is a good time to segue right now to what some other people that we talked to thought about the importance of family.
I'm learning how to be a better person to you. I will learn one day to be free.
Rabbi Seth Goldstein.
People can come together in different ways and form those family units in different ways as well. And I think that I want to honor that as well. I think that there's a spirit, because the values of what people get out of family can be created in other ways. But just recognizing that, I think that there is that element to it, that it isn't, that there is different levels of social interaction that we need to inform our lives, that we're not just individuals. We're not just part of a larger community or congregation, but that these smaller units, family, friendship units, however make that up, is also an important part of our spiritual lives and our spiritual development. Nick
Taniguchi.
I see them, ironically, I see my family not very often because I live in a very nomadic family. We jump around and we live our lives in the places that we feel that we should, and it's kind of always been that way. But because of that, we try not to leave disorder and like anger and bouts between us as we leave. So we're very supportive and loving of each other, especially. So then when we get back together, when we're all together in one place, we can all be together and happy. And it's, yeah.
Tyler May.
Everybody says that like family is the most important thing. I disagree. Because if you look, even I believe it's in Mark, especially like when Jesus was in the temples, the rabbis and some people, I don't think it says specifically who said this, but it's like, Jesus, like your family's like looking for you, and he's essentially just says that like, I am teaching like my family, like this is more important right now than like my own family who are even like worried about where I'm at. So he's just emphasizing that these spiritual life on life relationships are even more important than family relationships at time, because family relationships doesn't have to be blood relationships. So blood isn't necessarily thicker than water. Of course, I'm going to do a lot more for my family than I am for most people. That's natural. That's what comes natural to me. But I'm not like a super family-centric, like family above everything, because I don't think that that's the absolute best prioritization.
Author Wesley Hill.
I mean, home has connotations, I think, of a place where you belong. I think about the opposite of home being kind of a nomadic existence. I don't know where I'm going to be next year, or I don't know if I'm going to have a place that will welcome me in. Home is that conviction and that certainty, I think, that you have a place somewhere you belong. And you mentioned the gay community. I mean, I think part of the beautiful thing about gay communities is they take people in who have been rejected in many cases by their families or their churches. I mean, there's a reason that there's a lot of solidarity among the gay community, and it's I think it's often to do with that kind of sense of we've got to be family for one another. We've got to shelter one another in a way that we haven't been sheltered in our own biological families. So I mean, I just think as a Christian that's what the church is called to be. I mean, we are called to be the place where people can sink down roots and know that they're not going to be turned away. One of the I go to an Episcopal church, and one of the kind of iconic things about Episcopal churches is the red doors. And it's kind of just a symbol of these doors are here for you. This is a home for you. You are welcome here. And it seems to me that is pretty near the heart of what the church is meant to be in the world.
Fraser Tripp.
I guess with being gay, there's a lot of choice around who you can surround yourself with. The big thing in the gay community for a lot of folks is being able to choose your family. So there's this idea of selective family. We don't necessarily have to intermingle with the people that we were born into. I myself have a really great relationship with my biological family, but there's also this sense of community and just this culture around creating almost a second family, or for some people a first.
Barry Danylak.
For me, home is the sense of personal identity of who I am, my sense of connection with the ultimate, and the connection that I have with family, which to me is spiritual family. It's the wider, broader family rather than the nuclear family. And I guess knowing my place gives me great comfort, security, and hope. And having just a sense of identity, to me, is my sense of home.
No, it's not out of sadness, it's just out of wondering why. I'm alive.
So we just had a bunch of different points of view there, Daniel. I think it's now time to have this discussion amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
I'd like to know a little bit about your family life. What was growing up in what I assume is the idyllic 1890s of the outskirts of your country life as you grew up?
That's right. Yeah, my sisters actually had this phase where they were obsessed with dresses, and I think my mom would actually make them for my sisters. And they would see someone with pants, like a girl.
You were
with
basically
pants,
living Little Women. Yeah.
Basically, yeah. And I remember my sisters being affronted when they saw other kids wearing pants, girls, which is hilarious because, of course, they don't anymore. But my family was important to me, as most families are, I guess. But I had a very stable, loving, beautiful childhood, and it was my parents. It's hard to talk about your family to someone that hasn't seen it before, but my parents are very committed to each other. I've never seen them argue, although I've seen them disagree. I've never seen them fight. And they created a home that was a place of joy, a place of beauty, a place of growth. And I had 3 siblings. I was the oldest of 4. And my parents decided to homeschool us younger on, as many of our guests know, partly because they were scared of the bad boogies of culture, but partly because my dad was a teacher and he just did not have a good experience teaching high school. Part of it was I had a lot of learning disabilities and needed that. But I would define that childhood as a place where the weight of what was important was time and the influence on children. So my mom, although she was a nurse and had a career, she left that career in order to take care of us. And I have just fond memories of her taking us to the library lots and taking us on long walks outdoors and reading books aloud to us and cooking for us. My childhood is a beautiful memory because of a lot of those things. So it was a place of, I think I would just define it as a place that was defined by great sacrifices, because there were a lot of times where we were awful little humans and fought or were very selfish, and my parents worked through that with us.
So I'm sorry to break into your story here. I'm curious, did you realize that at the moment, or is this a lot of looking back on it and being like, I recognize this?
Or
no, recognizing your great childhood. Was it like you're in the middle of this, like, my childhood is awesome? Or is this as a 20-something human looking back and like, my childhood was pretty great?
No, I think it's from those memories. Those memories, I was happy. And I really enjoyed. I mean, there's things I was frustrated about as a kid, as most kids are, but I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
All right, so let me tell you about my story, which is the exact opposite. I love your Hallmark Channel, though, reminiscence of your childhood. I'm slightly joking. It's not like my childhood was Oliver Twist and I was forced to eat gruel or anything like that.
Because I was.
You were,
yeah. We had this stuff called cream of wheat.
Okay,
which is awful. I just hated it, and my mom would force me to eat it. Like I wasn't allowed another meal before it. So you could say there was gruel involved.
I see.
Yeah.
Do you like oatmeal?
Better than cream of wheat.
Oh yeah, better than cream of wheat. So for me, and I don't necessarily want to get into too much detail right now, maybe possibly in a future episode, but there was some abuse that I suffered as a very young kid. So I actually remember being kind of sad for most of my young life, where I was kind of disappointed. There was a lot of stress that went on, I found, in my family.
home?
Yeah, I was a middle child, so I have an older brother by 3 years, and I have a younger sister who's 5 years younger than I am. And I absolutely suffer from what is called middle child syndrome.
What is that?
Which means that...
I'm an oldest. I don't know.
Exactly. You had everything given to you. No. What it is that because you're the middle child, the first child that you have is... Usually you have a lot of more quality times you spend with the first child that you have, and as more siblings come out, you have less. So I wasn't old enough to join in with my brother, plus I didn't get as much of attention as him being the oldest. And I also didn't get a lot of attention because there was my young sister who had to be looked after because she was the youngest and she needed help type of thing. So the middle child normally gets a little bit forgotten because... You're not old enough to be with your older brother, not young enough to be with your younger sister. And so I was kind of there feeling like I was adrift in trying to figure things out on my own.
Was your relationship then with your parents like hard to define for you?
Very much so. Okay. I mean, it's not that I ever disbelieved that my parents didn't love me or something like that. Absolutely, I knew that. Okay. It was not, and why I asked you the question before about is this something that you came to a realization later?
Totally.
I came to a realization later, I understand where my parents are coming from, but it took a long time to really even look at my parents as human beings, which I know sounds really bad. But I feel like when you're growing up as a child, it's like, my parents are my parents, and they're like, whatever.
Sure.
And then you realize one day you come home from university, this is what it was for me, you come home from university and you're like, oh, they're people.
Right,
that
in the sense
makes
that
sense.
you could make those same kind of decisions they made, and they had
right. So
behind this.
To talk about the home life a little bit more, like my mom was a stay-at-home mom, which is like a thankless job. Raising 3 kids. My dad worked in the oil and gas industry here in Alberta, and so for the vast majority of my life,
so you had money growing up. That's exciting.
No, not an executive in an oil and gas industry, like the grunts of the oil and gas industry. So not that I was ever want for anything in my life, but we were definitely middle to probably lower middle class for most of my life. Until like the kids moved away so they could actually save some of the money that was coming.
I had single income. My dad's a teacher.
Yeah,
so it doesn't
exactly.
Make much
So
money.
not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot.
But I mean, my mom tells me now, like there were months where like there was really no money that we had. We had to figure it out as we went along. Yeah. But my dad worked this really weird schedule for the vast majority of my life until I think grade 11 is when he switched to being like what I call a normal job, where it was like Monday to Friday, almost like a 9 to 5 sort of thing. But for the vast majority of my life, he was on, if I can remember this, it was like a weird like 8 days on, 3 days off, 4 days on, 3 days off. It was weird. I don't remember how it was. It was this weird like on-off shift like this, but also half of that was working night shifts, and then half of it was day shifts. So he kept flipping back and forth. Hard. So there would be like he's going off to work at 9 p.m. to work his night shift, and he'll arrive home at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. So when I was going to school, sometimes he was coming home from work.
How did that affect you growing up?
Well, this is the thing, and this is what we've had open conversations now about it, where he was not a happy guy when I was growing up because his sleep schedule was all messed up because he was like not ever getting a good night's sleep, especially when you flip from working at night, having a day off, and going into a day shift at that point. That's just hard for the body. So he was often angry, quick to anger. That sort of thing. So there was fights and and that sort of thing growing up. And so I have this conscious memory of growing up, and I was like, I'm going to make it like a single day with my parents not yelling at me once. Oh, wow. And I would very often fail at that. Oh. And then I would put that upon me as like my failing, like I'm causing this to happen.
It was my mistake.
Where now as an adult, I can look back like that was nothing to do with me. That was my parents' deal. Yeah. But as a kid, you can't rationalize that. No. You can't really work your way through that. And so because of that, I think that somewhat soured my relationship with my parents, so I couldn't have as deep of a relationship as I wanted to. I also think that kind of soured my relationship with my siblings in a degree, because we were a little bit always on edge about what was going to happen. So not as idyllic, I guess, as your upbringing. This makes it sound way worse. It's not like we hate my parents. I visit my parents all the time.
You do, yeah.
I talk to my parents every week on the phone.
Okay.
So I keep in touch with them. Me and my dad are actually planning on going on a road trip on Route 66 in October. So we're planning that trip right now and seeing where it goes. So it's not like we don't talk to each other.
Yeah.
But as far as closeness goes,
right.
I don't really talk to my siblings a whole lot.
No. Yeah.
Occasionally, I might send a text here and there, but it's not something that is like a deep-seated relationship, which I've always kind of yearned for, but feels kind of awkward to try and do it in your 30s.
Why is that? Is that because of that tension in the house?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I just don't think any of us really dealt with emotions well. I think we all bottled it up a little bit, and so it's just not having the right maturity, I guess, of expressing emotions properly. And so it just took me a long time, even to my adulthood, to really figure that out.
Because there wasn't the space for that in your, parents. Huh.
Again, I want to be very clear. It's not like I was like thrown into a cellar or anything like that and thrown into darkness. My parents like very much sacrificed for me. Yeah. I always went on like every school trip that I could go on. I got to go and have a lot of different opportunities growing up that so many people don't get a chance to do. So I really respect them for that. Like my dad sacrificed a lot of his life to make sure that we had a good experience or be well fed and that sort of thing. It's just that I wish that sense of safety was felt in the home when I was growing up.
Yeah, and it's just so weird to think of a childhood without that, because that's something that I definitely felt growing up so much, and that's why the memories are happy looking back. Like I was born on the west coast of Victoria, and to this day a rainy day I love, and I'm like, why do I love this? It's because it reminds me of that early childhood.
That's why you like England so much.
Exactly, yeah, which I really liked, and it just shows that it was a happy time. We want to talk at some point in this episode about how family was the norm back then, whatever then is, whereas now it's almost unusual to see people make families, or less. It's not a guarantee.
Hello everyone, it's Kyle breaking into the conversation that Daniel and I were having, but there's a few different things that I need to talk about before we hear the rest of the conversation. First of all, it is really good to be back. Thank you so much for waiting for us and your patience with us getting this season together. It took a lot of work on both Daniel and I's part, but we are in a good place, and this is going to be a great season for you to listen to. Second thing I need to talk about is the fact that Assumptions is part of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. And as part of the network, there are so many great podcasts that you can go and listen to. I have a suggestion for you. The newest podcast to be added to the network is The Young Gaffers. The Young Gaffers has Jason and Adam bring you their refreshing, ridiculous, and uniquely Canadian perspective on the soccer world. If you have any passing love for the great game of soccer, or even just want to hear what they're watching on Netflix, it is a great show to sit down and listen to. I should also tell you, and this is sort of a self-plug, if you are in the Calgary area or can be in the Calgary area on February the 25th, there is going to be a course that's going to be held there called How to Start a Podcast. And I will be the co-trainer or co-facilitator, or I prefer to be called professor, even though I have no accreditation, and you can come and learn how you can begin this podcasting journey if that's something that really interests you. In the description, in the show notes of this episode, there's a link for you to go and buy tickets. Lastly, but certainly not leastly, we are supported by the ATB. And one of their initiatives is called ATB Cares. ATB Cares is perhaps one of the coolest ideas ever. So listen to this. You can donate to your favorite charity on atbcares.com, and ATB will cover the fees plus add 15% to your donation. It's really great. In 2017 alone, over $4 million was donated to charity through ATB Cares. So if you want to give to your favorite charity and give a little bit extra, this is a great way to do that. atbcares.com. All right, I think that's everything I need to tell you. So let's get back into the episode and finish off this conversation that Daniel and I were having.
ask this then about your parents. Why did they raise a family? I mean, they're not here to tell us, but
I
from
know.
what you saw and what you experienced, what was the motive behind that?
That is a tough question. I don't
know.
want to put words into my parents' mouth. I would hazard a guess
Okay.
that it was the same thing that most people in the 70s and late 60s thought, which was you get married and you have a family.
It was the cultural norm.
It was the cultural norm,
Okay.
so that's just what you did.
Right. Kind of like going to university.
Yeah.
So like you did. Okay.
Right, that's just something you went and did. And so I feel like that's probably what caused them to make a family.
Yeah.
I think my mom always wanted to have kids as well,
Yeah.
so it's probably played a part in it.
Right. So did that? Because I would say my parents. We'll talk about this, but the motivation from my parents was different, and that affected how we were raised. I'm just curious if that motivation of more just habit, if that, do you think that had an effect on how your parents treated you and how they went about their days?
I mean, it could have been.
Sure.
I mean, definitely if you watch films or TV shows and stuff about this, the prevailing theme is usually the female of the relationship really wants to have a family and the man really doesn't, and so he's kind of just there, but he's not really involved in the family so much. That I really feel has been the big cultural shift in the last, I would say, 15, 20 years, where all my friends who are male, who have families, are super involved with the raising of their children, like making decisions of what to do. They know what their children's schedule is. They know what's going on at their school. And I can 100% guarantee my dad did not.
Okay.
He came to every football game I had. He came to every 4-H thing that I had going on. He came to every band practice or recital thing that he could possibly do because he wanted to support me.
Okay.
Like he did. He did
more of obligation.
He did love me.
Okay.
It wasn't like an obligation.
Sure.
But could he tell you like what I was struggling with in school? Could he tell you what my subjects were in school? Could you tell
who you were as
any
a
of my
person?
teachers' names were? I bet you 100% no.
Okay. So he wasn't invested in who you were as a person.
Right, that's what it felt like, yeah.
Okay. That's just interesting how you talked about how. Okay, let's take a step back here, because when I think about our culture now, and we'll talk about this as we mentioned, that I feel like family is no longer the given, as we described. And overall, I guess the assumption I've had, and maybe I think a lot of people in the church have, because in the church it's pretty typical to have families still, is that choosing not to commit to having a family is a certain selfishness. And I feel this especially from stay-at-home moms. Like, I think my mom might, I'm not going to put her words in her mouth, but she might share this opinion, in the sense that she's staying at home, she's sacrificing her career and her mornings and every aspect of her life in order to raise children. And so not doing that is just because you want to have your career and do your own thing and enjoy that. And what you just said earlier there about how your friends that are contemporary that are having kids are very invested in it. So it's no longer a sense that this is just what you do, which could then harm your children because you behave that way, versus I want to do this, I want this to happen, therefore I'm going to be committed to it, and that actually might be better for kids because they know that they are committed.
I would guess that we're going to have to see how this plays out over the next 30 years, but I think every generation is basically a response to the parenting that they had. That's why there was like the hippie movement in the 60s, because of the parents that they had in the 40s and 50s, and how the 80s parents were different than even that, and how now the parents of today are kind of in kind of retaliation, like we want to be hands-on involved. We don't want to be this stone wall of a man in there. I think what would be important here too is, what do we mean by family? Right. Because does family necessarily mean kids?
In
this context, yes. I don't think a family needs to have kids necessarily in order to be that term, but I think for our conversation we should.
Yeah, for now. I mean, we're going to have an episode dedicated to community, which is a family, and we're going to talk about, maybe we'll talk about it on this episode, but definitely when we talk about singleness, I think one of the things that Christian theology, when properly understood, so when you read the Bible and you see how the shift takes place in thinking from biological, like you have your own kids, that is your heritage. That's what the Old Testament Hebrew concept was. The Lord blesses you, you have children. And then along comes Christ, who had no kids, and he...
That we know of.
But yeah, so he has no kids, and he has a sense of spiritual family. He has offspring that are spiritual. And then you see that throughout the New Testament a fair bit, this idea of Paul, for all we know, didn't have children. but he talked about he had letters to his son Timothy, his son in the faith. So the sense that faith through the family of Christ, through the spiritual offspring that takes place, that there is then a family that exists that isn't just biological.
I think that exists really nicely with our last season where we're talking about the stories that we make for ourselves, like how do we tell our own story. And one of my great fears was the legacy that I'm going to leave behind, right, where I feel and fear sometimes that I might not have anything of lasting value to give to future generations. And it doesn't necessarily have to be my offspring that I'm leaving, but like an idea or an institution or a work of art or something like that, where Christ, as you said, was kind of doing that with an idea, like of Christianity is like go forth and like multiply, but the idea multiplying, not necessarily progeny or anything like that.
From a spiritual understanding, it's very much you are born in Christ. Like Christ does a rebirth in terms of what your motives are and what your desires are in a Christian. And so it's not just this sense of my doctrine is going to produce family. It's a sense of I'm creating spiritual family through something that's happening that's more than just an idea here.
Yeah. So going back to a question I had a couple of moments ago, is family ultimately going to be important to you? Do you want to create a family of your own?
I do, yeah. I love kids. As people who know me in the church or see me around children, whether that's at work or at church or with friends, know that I love children. And I'm very aware that having a family entails a lot of work and has a huge responsibility to it. And so I don't want to do it too early or do it just because, whoopsie, that's how it happens. But just this sense of a real sense of commitment to it and a seriousness to it. But yeah, I do. But then at the same time, and we'll talk more about this, I think, when we get to the episodes on singleness and community. And I feel like my life isn't incomplete without it. Maybe that's because I'm 25 and I'm just not at that stage where I want to have a family yet. But the sense that I am part of, like you say, there's other definitions of family, and there, for me, my spiritual family, the young people that are in my life, that I'm able to lead in worship at church, that I'm able to spend time with when I'm with their parents, who are some of my best friends. I know that I'm impacting them, and I'm creating a sort of family in that. But yes, I want a family for myself.
That's great. I now want to write a kid's book that's called "Whoops, You Happened." I'm the same way though.
Why is that?
I've always wanted to have a family. I felt that. I think in a way it's a way to have a second chance of creating that family unit for myself that I feel that I was somewhat robbed of when I was a kid.
It didn't work out for Luke and Vader, so
I don't know what that means, but I'll believe you when you say that. So I think that's kind of the selfishness in my heart a little bit, is that I want to try and have that second chance of creating a great family. Now, having said that, just like yourself, when I was in my early 20s, I was like, no, now is not the right time.
But you knew you wanted it.
But I knew I wanted it. At about 28 is when there was a switch that was flipped in my head. I'm like, I'm ready now. Like, I really want to start a family. Like, that's something that I was really wanting to work towards to create. And for 6 years, it hasn't happened. So we'll see what happens, I guess.
We'll talk more about that on our episode on dating and relations.
Dating, that's right. But yes, I think family is important. I think that is a great foundation for not just children's, but for society to have that solidarity or that solid foundation for people to grow from.
So then how do you feel about, I guess, would you say that our culture right now, family is the exception rather than the rule for singles to want?
Yeah, I really have to look at research to say. I mean, only anecdotally, I would say that's probably true. Yeah. I just don't know if the data would bore out the same.
But the expectation is definitely
there. I think that really, from the most part, especially if we're talking about people in their 20s, the idea is like, I want to be free and have as many relationships as I can pursue at this time of my life. And settling down family, or that being the goal of actually a long-term relationship, I don't feel is like the overriding quest that people are having. I think that does not happen really until you get a little bit older.
Okay.
That's my own interpretation, though. I don't know. What do you feel?
Well, we talked about this already in the sense that the society expectation in the 60s, 70s, 80s was that you would have a family, and that would be what society is built around. And I mean, a lot of the social conservatives have these kind of flashing points of terror over how people aren't having kids anymore, and the bedrock of society is crumbling, and that's what we need. Yeah, immigration, all these things, right? Like there's just so
right.
much baggage in that discussion. But the sense that no longer is. I guess when I think of my family, what united what my parents were doing with us was a sense of selflessness, in the sense that we're not doing this because it's the norm so much. We want to do this for other reasons and have kids. I'll talk about that, but much more this idea of we're doing this not for ourselves. And so then to have a society where the idea is that a lot of people are living their lives for themselves and just to pursue their own interests, how does that then shape what
Well,
society
I'm going to
does?
throw a truth bomb at you here,
Okay.
Daniel, because I think that inevitably anyone who makes the choice to have kids, it is kind of a selfish
Totally.
act
Yeah.
to have a kid. It's like, I need to have another person
Right.
exist in this world, and I'm the person to make it happen.
Totally. And as you said, the sense of, you described it for your family potential down the road is I want to fix the mistakes.
Yeah, no,
I want to prove myself.
I am not the one. I'm not any different than anyone else. Is what I'm trying
Right.
to say. I'm not
No.
special in
No,
that
that's
idea.
interesting.
But I
Yeah.
think it is a
Yeah.
selfish act
Sure.
in a way to
It's a
create
legacy.
kids. Yeah,
It's your family name even, right? You see that sometimes.
that's right. And they have to wear my family crest.
Yeah.
That's right.
Is it going to be branded on their chests?
I am
or
going to, yes. I'm
tattooed?
tattooed on
Okay.
them at 2
Okay.
years old,
Okay.
actually.
Oh, 2. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Most people do on the 9th day. You realize that?
Is that true? I need to read this book of yours someday. So I think my question here then, to kind of wrap up this conversation, is what is something that you want to keep from your parents? Like what parenting skill or what thing that they did is something you absolutely want to instill in your children, if you're so blessed to have them yourself?
Yeah, if I'm so blessed. I think this kind of ties back to that opening question of what defined the family life. It was, when I think back on that childhood, it was hard work that my parents put in and a lot of sacrifices I've mentioned. But it was bound up by a selfless love, and it was marked by joy, in the sense that I believe that that family is my parents created family partly out of a sense of responsibility, and maybe there were selfish motives, like we're human. My parents weren't Jesus. Spoiler. But a lot of the reason why they made a lot of the choices they did in terms of protecting us kids and this time they spent with our kids, and just like I remember my dad was someone that whenever there was some confrontation going on between us kids or between us, my mom and I, he would take me aside and really delve into why I was having this, like what was going on in my heart.
So sit in the emotion that you're having
again?
right now. Sit in the emotion.
Well,
that
not
you're
in the sense of
having.
like you're angry, deal with your anger, but just like, okay, what's your motivation? Like, why are you so upset here?
No, that's what I mean, though.
Yeah.
It's like, if you're sad, like, tell me what is making you actually
Right.
sad. Like, what is the actual cause of?
But what
of
I'm
this?
getting at is he was doing it from a sense of spiritual nurturing, of saying that, look, you yourself are selfish, and if you're going to behave naturally, you're just going to tear this family apart. Even as a kid, you're going to do that, and you need something else. You need a change of heart. You need Christ in your life as kids. And so he did that so often. He would take us aside and really work. And there's a lot of, you realize now as an adult just how much harder it is. You hate it as a kid, right? Oh, your dad's going to come and lecture you and deal with this is the worst. But then as an adult now, you realize that even that choice of taking those 45 minutes to have that conversation with us was a selfless choice. Like, he was exhausted from teaching. My dad is chronically ill. Like that was a great sacrifice. So I guess the point of raising kids and the point of having that home that nourished that was to show us Christ in a way, was to show us our need for Christ and a way to nurture us spiritually. And so for them, the sacrifice, like I think of my mom, someone who had given up her career and had all these, selfish kids and dirty diapers, and she goes, but I look back and I remember her having such joy over the acts of parenting.
Right.
And I think that when it's done, not in a sense of trying to prove your worth as humans, but out of a sense of these kids are being raised by God, in a sense, like there's something greater going on here, then somehow that work, that sacrifice is transformed into something of joy. And just the details, like, so when you ask me, like, what do I want for my kids? Well, I definitely want that. That terrifies me because that's a lot of work and that I can't do that on my own. That's why I need just God to help me with that. I need the church in terms of making that more than just my family. But yes, I want that. But I also want a childhood for my kids where they can enjoy the good things of common goodness. Like, we had so much fun reading books aloud. We had so much fun going on walks, cooking together. I remember the sunlight. I remember the textures of my childhood, the smells of my childhood, and those details that doesn't matter if you're spiritual or not, you're able to enjoy and do it for my parents, out of this context of joy, because they weren't doing it for themselves and they weren't doing it to prove themselves. That was just a real gift that I got.
Yeah, I'll echo some of that. I mean, I definitely have very fond memories. A lot of my mom, because she was there a lot with just us kids. But I remember very fondly, like, we'd sing with each other, like growing up. She had a little song book that we would sing from. We read a lot when we were kids. That was like my favorite thing to do. We lived on a farm for a lot of my life, so we'd go on walks, nature exploration, that sort of thing. So I really valued a lot of that when I was a kid as well. The one thing I'll layer on, and one thing that I am hoping to do, if again I am blessed with children, is I really love the fact that my parents created new traditions for just our family.
Nice. Like what?
Specifically, there's just one that I'll talk about, but there's this thing that we did for Easter that none of the rest of our family did. Like, my grandma didn't do this, like my other aunts and uncles don't do this. Yeah. But for Easter, what we did, yes, this involves presents, by the way, but what she made us do, my mom, is that in order for the Easter Bunny to find us, what we had to do was take a pile of our clothes and make a nest for it somewhere in the house. So we would go and make this little nest, and in the morning, that's where like our little chocolate eggs and stuff were laid and stuff. Yeah. And we would usually get something like maybe like a video game or a book or whatever that would also be laid there in the pile as well. So for Easter, that was like our Easter thing, and we had to color eggs and all that stuff as well. And I just like the fact that that's something that only our family got to do, and that was something new. So I don't want to do that exact thing. I want to make something new that our family is going to experience.
Hopefully worshiping the risen Christ rather than the Easter Bunny, but whatever.
Maybe watch Jesus Christ Superstar. Okay. Maybe that's what we'll do. We'll compromise on this. But yeah, just creating that new, just making something unique for us and letting there be creativity in the household as well, where things don't have to be like rigid all the time, where we can be a little bit more playful with it. Is there anything that you think you would change as a parent that your parents did?
Yeah, I don't quite know how this is going to work out, but I feel like because
I don't want to have sons is what I'm trying to say.
I really just want girls.
Yeah.
I think my parents sheltered us, perhaps in one sense. I admire the sheltering that I got, in the sense that there was a lot of good that came out of it, and that the amount of time, face-to-face time, that I had with my mom and amongst books and nature that I wouldn't have got otherwise. But I think, it took me a while to work out that.
So do you mean that you don't think you'll homeschool your children, or is that more that you want them to see the realities of the world quicker?
I want them to have friends that aren't Christians.
Oh, I see.
I want them to have people coming over to my house that are gay, right? Like I want that kind of, that broader society.
Drive to the rock concert and kick them out. You have to go. I'm forcing you.
But I don't know. It's funny. I wonder if that'll change once I have kids and I panic a little bit. But yeah, just that sense that there was, and especially over the high school years, I think that was the case. I don't necessarily think it was such a big deal in the younger grades, but over high school, that's when there was just habits that probably weren't as healthy. But yeah, I'd say that would be the one that I would think of prominently. There's other little things, but that's the big one. Yeah,
I think something that I would change is actually something that sounds like your parents did, which was have those kind of tough conversations with us a little bit more, which is, I can tell that you're angry, I can tell that you're upset. Like, let's delve into this. Like, let's really uncover what is going on here. I know that they're coming from through like the lens of Christ and stuff, and I probably wouldn't, but it's just
yet.
Yes, that's right. Plot twist. Episode 8, I convert. No,
stay tuned.
I just want to make sure that, as tough as those conversations are, and as much as I know if my parents had done that when I was a kid, I would have hated it. Yeah. I would definitely appreciate that when I got older. I'm glad that they took the time, or would have taken the time, to really uncover that and unpack that for me, so I didn't always have to feel like I had to internalize every emotion. Yeah. and cause a lot of problems
Yeah.
in my later life.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to recognize that still in our world today, especially because I'm so in tune with the LGBTQ
Yeah.
population, is that there are times where you do have to keep some of the realities of your life bottled up just because of the realities of your home life. And the other unfortunate part, maybe nothing to do with that necessarily, there are times that people are born into really bad family situations, whether there is like excessive abuse is going on or even worse things are happening. And that I think that oftentimes that there's this idea that you have to honor your family.
Right.
And I think sometimes that is actually a negative.
Totally.
That
Absolutely.
sometimes you do have to distance yourself from your real
Totally.
biological
Oh, yeah.
family and find a new family for yourself. going
Yeah, in
forward.
the sense, I mean, as a Christian, I would say that you have to distance yourself from sin. And if there's been a lot of just awful deeds that have taken place, awful motives, awful acts, then that is wrong. Those things have to be condemned. But the people behind those deeds are still people and still need redemption. Maybe you're not the one to give them that, though.
Right.
Maybe you just need to get away. Yeah.
So I think we've both decided that family is important.
Yeah, but it's interesting how there are different reasons for that. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the reason you want to have family is partly legacy, partly you like kids, partly and want to nurture kids in creativity and as people, but partly also to fix the mistakes in the sense of to prove your worth.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because that was a theme that came out from last season of this idea of legacy and like what happens when you have an identity that you have to prove. Yes.
No, I know it's
still the case.
It seems like there's a lot of the same things that motivate me, no matter what the actual topic is.
You're consistent. That's good. Yeah, no, it's fascinating.
Right. And I think what's great to see is that I think I can see a very clear through line between how your parents raised you and into the man that you are here today. And I think there's a lot of credit that should be placed on your parents for allowing you to struggle, but being that bedrock that you knew that you could come to and help you out. And I can see also why I think that perhaps, not that I don't want to make this sound, I don't know. I'm going to say that you make Christianity easy in some ways, in that you're very easy to say, hey, this is what Christ preaches, this is how my family practices it. It just kind of works type of thing. And I think you're kind of like the perfect example of how that should work when that isn't necessarily the reality sometimes.
Totally. Yeah, and it also makes having those conversations a little difficult when there are people that came out of very broken, abusive homes, that faith was a huge part of that. Yeah, and there's also, just as you were talking about that perfect, it's a huge pressure, I think, for me, in the sense of it's easy for me to fall into a similar attitude that you have, in the sense of trying to prove it. Especially because I had like you're doing it out of the negative, right? You had bad experiences that you want to prove.
So you don't want to be the person who like screws up
exactly,
the family. It's
right?
Like, oh, my parents were able to do this. Why can't I?
Totally. And even because my mom's side that wasn't as perfect, but my dad, who's not a Christian, my dad's dad, my grandfather, who's not a Christian, my dad's a Christian, but he wasn't a Christian, and yet and there were mistakes in their family, but the feeling that I'm getting is that he sacrificed a lot for his wife, who was dying of sickness, and they had 4 kids. They had a lot of those similar motives. My grandfather is a very selfless, loving person. So that sense of generations, like, that's a lot of pressure to put on me. And my response to it is going, well, it's actually not, if I try to do it on my own strength, on my own abilities, I am going to fail. So there's something that has to happen beyond this. The other thing that I picked up from this conversation, which I'd be curious to talk to others about, is that sense of the reason why people, the sense of people having families now out of choice, not out of habit, actually makes for better families because the parents are therefore more involved. And that's just something that I hadn't considered before.
Yeah, that's my sense. I would like to see if that's actually true.
Right.
More than anything.
So if there's a publisher who wants to pick up this book deal,
we get 10% of that. That's a cut.
Research money. We get some research money. So.
I think it's a good segue, though. If you do have any comments, concerns, like I said, anything that was provoked in you, send us those emails at assumptionspod@gmail.com.
Yeah, do a voice recording and we can hear your voice.
That's right.
Yeah.
Daniel, how can people get in contact with you? How can they follow you on the internet?
Well, I have a website.
Nice.
It's called www.danielmelvillejones.com. Melville is Melvill. Just Google it.
Perfect. The best way to follow me is probably on my Twitter. I'm at the Kyle Marshall. That's Marshall with 2 L's. Although, if you want to see just an encompassing of everything that I do, you can also go to my website, which is thekylemarshall.com.
This podcast conversation, this first episode, has set everything up quite nicely. There's a lot of themes that have been hinted at or overtly mentioned that we will be tackling later on. Things about the broader family of community that takes place, dating and relationships and how that looks, a little more about Kyle's story, marriage and commitment and how that fits in. So we're excited to dive into that a little bit more. Our next episode is going to be on sexuality and the purpose of it. Why have sex? What does it do to someone?
It's going to be a lot of fun to talk about.
I can't wait.
Assumptions is produced by Kyle Marshall and Daniel Melville Jones. This episode edited by Kyle Marshall. Artwork, as always, by the great Chris Taniguchi. All the music that you're hearing in this week's episode is by the band The Parson Redheads, whose latest album, Blurred Harmony, is available anywhere that you can buy music. Thank you so much to everyone who agreed to be interviewed for this season. Full credit will be given in a later episode. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks.